Okay, I am so thrilled. Thrilled isn't even the right word. I'm so honored for you to be here with me and to be speaking about this glorious book that you wrote. And I don't even have a cover on it. I don't know which airport it was left in. I don't know like which restaurant I left it in. I've just have devoured it. So thank you so much for being here with me.
It's a complete pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, as our book club begins your book and we walk through it together, I have so many questions, way more than I have time to ask you, but I'm just going to dive right in. Finding your voice, losing your voice, rediscovering and protecting your feminine voice is such a powerful and sometimes even shocking theme that you take us through the book, through the Book of Longings. You know, we watch Anna find her voice. Then we observe Tabitha have her voice completely taken away from her. And then later in the book, Tabitha finds her voice again, and in a different way, in a different and a new and a fresh way. But both women are fighting for their voice. And that's a theme throughout the entire book, which is so rich. And I know that you've had a voice through your writing for many, many years now. But because just between you and I'm completely obsessed with your work. Like as of the last couple of years, I've read, I think, almost every single thing that you've written.
Oh.
I have, and I've just devoured it. And I feel like you're somewhat of a soul sister to me in the way that you write. But what I've loved so much about observing the way that you've written is, and in your most recent art, how your voice has changed, you know? And I remember in the Dance of the Dissident Daughter, you had to make a conscious decision about allowing your voice as a writer to shift alongside the journey that you were taking, that your heart was on. And in a way, you had to find your voice again. So my question for you, in the Book of Longings, we see Tabitha's voice taken away from her, and then we see her being offered it again in the form of a lyre. So can you tell us, in this beloved community that I love so much, tell us about the courage it takes for one to find one's voice again?
First, let me say, I will be your soul sister any day.
Oh, thank you.
Every day of the week and 10 times on Sunday. So
Oh, good.
I'm so honored to be here. And I love this question because it goes to the heart of everything I am feeling and believing. You know, you want your historical fiction to be relevant more than anything, at least I do.
Yes.
And I felt like finding our voices today is so important for women, refinding them, finding them in new ways, which you're talking about. You know, that was always the thing for me. I grew up a long time ago in the pre-feminist South in a little town, very conventional and traditional. And I had to struggle to break free of all of the confines of that world that shaped me.
Yes.
That was both religious and cultural in all kinds of ways. And I think that has been a life journey for me in a lot of ways. So when I started writing, it was very important to me that I find my authentic voice. That's what I was always struggling for. I wanted to come from the inside out. What am I saying, what is true to me and not what I've heard people say to me? That's very hard to parse out sometimes. And it's a process. And then it became, okay, how brave am I? And, you know, I've said many times that at least one time in our life, we need to do something that takes our breath away.
Yes.
And I remember sitting at my computer, oh my goodness, how many, 1994? So quite a while ago, when nobody was ready for this, and told this story that I tell in the Dance of the Distant Daughter. And I remember sitting back in my chair thinking, okay, this takes my breath away. I think I've done it. However, when I started writing the Book of Longings, I felt that same thing again. Okay, this is taking my breath again. But you know, that's what so much of life is about for women, for everyone, for humans. It's finding the courage to be true to our soul, our
Yeah.
true self, and then have the courage to voice that in our way, and then the courage to stand by it when the world attacks it.
Oh,
So, you know, there's a whole process to this. But I used to have a quote on the wall stairway that went up to my study, and it was, "Writing is an act of courage." I
wow.
think this is true.
Yes, it absolutely is true. I love when Anna goes into the library for the first time in Egypt, and she's overwhelmed, which you and I know this as both of us being writers. When you step into a library and you just see the rows and rows of thinkers and mamzers that have gone before you, and people that are so courageous to put their truth out into the world, there is something about it that takes your breath away. Anna calls it the Holy of Holies in that way. But then she's angered because of the 500,000 scrolls, all of them were written by men, with the exception of just a handful. So, and you're touching on it right now, which is why I wanted to draw our attention to it. But what, from your perspective, what is the reason that women's voices have been silenced? I mean, everyone from Sappho to um, Enheduanna, who you mentioned in the book as well, Mary Magdalene, who was disregarded from the scriptures. Like, what is the fear that keeps culture from allowing women's voices to be honored and heard?
Well, I think you just touched on something very important. There has been a fear of women and of women's sexuality.
Mm.
It's a very complex kind of phenomena, really. If you look back and read about it, you can't really say it in a paragraph. But I think history did not record women's stories. They may have been there. There may have been a lot more going on with women than we could imagine, and yet history didn't record that because history was written by men and for men.
Mm.
Why were they left out? Because someone's got to be in power and someone's got to be under them. What is that structure, that paradigm? I mean, there are all kinds of things, but I do think that if you dig all the way down at the very bottom of it, there is some kind of fear, and it has to do with women being identified with nature, with the body, with childbirth, and all of the messy stuff that goes with being a woman sometimes.
Yes.
And it is devalued, and there's a dichotomy between what is holy and what is sensual,
Mm.
what is sexuality and what is spiritual. And this dichotomy was made at least 2,000 years ago, and
Mm.
has been around for a long time. And the Greeks and Romans really perfected it. And so
Mm.
we're left with it, remnants of it in our religions and in our culture.
Yes, you're so right. And my mind is going back to the part of the book where Anna is expressing that under Judaic law, that holiness is somewhat synonymous with purity. And all of these rituals of purity, from my perspective, having grown up in a very evangelical, very conservative upbringing, and sort of finding and journeying my way out of it, the aftermath and after effect of holiness being synonymous with our purity is why I think that Tabitha is finding her voice in the street, screaming about her rapist, exposing this to the world, and everyone is completely freaked out. And her family feels an insurmountable amount of shame, doesn't know how to deal with it because, like you're saying, that we've quantified our purity, we've quantified our holiness in relation to our purity. And now we see the way that the power structures that you're mentioning are like scrambling to keep their power by making women stay silent about the very things that we need to not be silent about.
Yeah, it goes together. It really does. I mean, how do we end up with a religion like Christianity in which one of the highest values or things to achieve is perpetual virginity. I mean, it's an interesting thing. How do we end up with a religion where celibacy is holier than not being celibate? I mean, these are questions that go back to something long ago that got embedded and then got enculturated in not just in churches, but in people. And, you know, I maintain that everything is holy.
Yes.
And that the divine in the feminine form and the masculine form, I mean, God is not male or female. God just is, you know,
Right.
but we need ways to relate to that. So we have to use pronouns. And I just want it done in an egalitarian way so that we have this balanced psyche and balanced culture and churches and religion where all voices are valued.
Yes.
And where sexuality, for instance, that we're talking about, or the body or nature or the physical matter, mother, those things are just as valued as not. Yeah.
Yes. So another theme that I see, which is in line with what we're talking about, is it's subtle to me, but it's the theme of shame throughout the Book of Longings. The shame that Tabitha cast on her family, the way that they punished her because of it, the shame of sitting for Heron and Anna almost gets stoned to death, the shame of people being skeptical over Jesus, who Jesus's father really was, which this for me was such an insightful, just such an insightful thing for you to point out to us as readers. Like, oh my goodness, this kid was raised, grew up, probably with people surrounding him, like, who knows who your daddy really is? Like, I can hear the bullies in Jesus's ear around this idea of, and shaming him for, you know, who's your dad. I love when Anna is like at the end of herself and she's experienced it all. She's almost stoned to death. And she finally ventures out and she says she goes out without fear because everything's already been said. It's already been said, already been done. And, you know, for me personally, I experienced an excruciating amount of public shaming a couple of years ago. And it's the kind of public exposure that leaves you feeling completely crippled, totally powerless, and in search for your legs again, quite frankly. I recall in one of your books, you expressing how you experienced a lot of backlash when your message shifted from one of very traditional American accepted evangelicalism to finding a home within the divine feminine. And now you're offering us a novel wherein we are faced with the idea of Jesus being a sexual being, of Jesus being a human, of Jesus being a husband. And so I wanted to ask you, how did your own experience with that shame help you shape these characters as you were writing about them?
Well, I'm sure it had a tremendous impact, just as everything that we experience is threaded through and then comes out in our creative work somehow, however subtly. You know, when you said that, you made me remember going to the mailbox one day, not long after The Dance of the Distant Daughter came out, and my mailbox was full of hate mail.
Oh.
And I opened one of them. It's my all-time favorite, and I've written about it and I've told this story. I opened it up and it said, "Dear whore of Babylon."
Oh,
And
no.
then that was the best part of the whole letter. Really, I thought, well, the dear part was really nice. I thought that was interesting, you know, but it's just amazing how we use shame to keep people in line. You know, that has been that first century that I wrote about is a time when the shaming was a piece of culture. I mean, it was just baked in. And it was used particularly to keep women in line. And I think that still happens today. And it definitely shaped how I think about all of these characters, particularly when I wrote Tabitha. And, you know, she was not in the original manuscript, when I wrote part one of the story, she wasn't there. And
Really?
when I read it, I mean, at my first draft, I felt something was missing and I didn't know what it was. And I kept mulling this over. And and then I woke up one morning, I thought, Anna needs a friend that will grow with her, but also will lose her voice and be silenced in a completely and horrific way. And then re-find her voice in a very creative and different way. But I wanted Anna to collect these women as she went through the story, because communities of women are really significant if we're going to build new structures that allow for the divine feminine. We need to tell our stories to one another and have bonds and solidarity. And so Anna collects women as she goes, and in the end, it becomes a kind of family with which together to face the world. And I wanted to bring these women to life, but also these background characters in biblical stories. I wanted them to be refreshed. I wanted us to see them through Anna's eyes, through a woman's lens, and to be able to rethink them and to see Jesus as a human. I mean, what's so terrible about being a human? I don't know why we would devalue that. I mean, I think what the opposite is true. It seemed to me that we have so focused and emphasized the divinity of Jesus that we have completely lost touch with his humanity. I mean, he was a human being who was born around 4 BCE and died and lived and laughed and loved and did all these things that humans do, and yet was made this Christ figure in the end. And we have separated those things out and diminished one of them to our detriment.
Yes.
Because if Jesus as a human could have that kind of vision and compassion and inclusion and freedom and all the things that his vision envisioned and brought and taught, well, then maybe we're capable of it too. He's not the other. He's one of us, you know.
Yes. That is so powerful. And you put so much work, anyone could tell, into humanizing these biblical characters that I think are so, as you're saying, so easily dismissed because we've just been sort of fed this VeggieTale version of biblical narrative, or we've been taught it, or we grew up in it. But you humanize them and so vastly that it has increased my empathy for these characters in a way that I never thought imaginable. Even the character of Judas, even Judas. And it took me a minute to realize who Judas was. I was like, there is no way. How is she going to pull this one off? You know, like, it was incredible. But I think, to your point, it is so valuable what you're doing to humanize these characters and to reframe them in such a way that we are forced to come face to face with the humanity of them and forced to wrestle with, why am I so disturbed by this? Why do I have such an issue of thinking of Jesus as being married? You know?
Right. Well, you know, the mail I've gotten about it, I should start that by saying that the response has been overwhelmingly positive. But of course, there's always some people who don't appreciate what you're doing. And that mail had to do with Jesus being married, obviously, and the fact that Jesus was sexualized. And, you know, I tried very hard to handle that with circumspect and with gentleness and with dignity, because in this case, less is more. But I felt like it was important to do that, but they were very upset because, as they said, it wasn't being holy. And I think that says a lot about themselves as well. But Judas, I really wanted to, well, he's such a bad boy in the Bible, you know, he's just the ultimate evil bad boy. And I kept thinking, if we could just get to know him, he probably had reasons. Maybe they weren't good reasons, but something got out of hand.
Mm.
I saw him as this figure very wounded, whose life was in response to this painful and traumatic, catastrophic wound he had as a child. And he responded to the world in this way of political theater. He thought that would save everything. So I wanted Judas to have a reason. And I also will say this, I felt like he resembles people I know in that they're so dogmatic. They're so entrenched in their principles that they lose sight of what's in front of them, like a human being and compassion and love and a life that we see. We're coming from this place of rigidity of our principles. And I think when we start to value principles over love, we're in trouble. This is what happened with Judas. We see this in fundamentalism.
Yeah, we do. We do. We see this often. And I think that the voice that you've given to Anna, the freedom that Jesus gives to her subsequently to imagine this large God, is really outstanding and something that I desire for my own life. You know, I desire so much. Your salutation that you use a lot, I bless the largeness in you. But a way that we can begin to sort of reframe our rigidity or to question our rigidity. I love curious people. I love anyone who doesn't think that they've got it all together. You know, I love anyone who's willing to ask the question that shouldn't be asked, you know, and that's what in our book club, it is a group of women and men who just want a bigger God. They want to see things in a new way. And quick story, the other day, actually in response to reading The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, I told my daughters, I have two daughters and one son. I told them that we were going to pray to Goddess. And they were like, what on earth? Like, they're kind of giggly, you know, and they think that they're being really naughty and stuff. And I loved in the Book of Longings how Yaltha introduces Sophia to Anna, the divine feminine spirit of God. And Anna is both freed by that, but she's also like nervous in a really cute way. And I saw that with my daughters. I saw like this excitement, this giddiness, this childlike, like, oh my gosh, are we allowed to do this kind of feeling from them? But what I told them is, as you were saying, to think of God as having a gender is completely ridiculous. But so long as we're just so dead set and certain that he's a male, then why not introduce this idea of femininity? Because I feel like, and tell me if you agree, that the way that I grew up, at least, I was always measuring and seeing God in proximity to man. It's God the Father. It's not God the Mother. It's the God of Abraham. It wasn't the God of Sarah. And so in what way have you, I mean, obviously your book does this in such an outstanding way, but like, in what way have you felt this largeness of God as you have experienced divine feminine?
Well, I love that question too, because in a way, my journey has been about expansion. I think that we're all meant to grow and evolve as spiritual creatures in human bodies and human bodies with a spirit. I think we're meant to evolve. And that for me is about expansion. It has to do with setting God free. Yes. Setting history free, setting ourselves free. And that allows us to explore and ask questions, and not just allow the questions, but to love the questions. Mm-hmm. There's genius in that. There's great leaps forward in that. And when I allowed myself to not know everything that I was taught and not insist that all of that was correct, I was thrown into the freedom of unknowing. And that was a beautiful place for me. I mean, it is also uncomfortable and painful and disturbing and beautiful and thrilling and tantalizing and all of these things. But it's also important, you know, in our lives to have these, to be able to be in those places where we can ask the questions. And I remember being in church one Sunday. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church in Georgia, in the pre-feminist, pre-civil rights South. That may say everything for you. But I think that Sunday, as an adult with two little children in toddlers at the time, I was sitting there, and all of the deacons, as we call them, were on the front rows. For some reason, I don't remember, but they were all men. The minister was preaching on the fatherhood of God. It's interesting you just said that. It's what triggered this memory. We were talking about the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, and we actually sang the hymn, Faith of Our Fathers. And I sat there feeling alone, isolated, not part of it. In a way, I understood in that moment that when they said he, it didn't really include me, that I was peripheral.
Right.
I was secondary. And that was a turning point for me. And I set myself free after that. And, you know, was able to enter into a journey in which there were all kinds of evolvings going on, not just into the divine feminine, which Anna did in the Book of Longings. She follows a path of evolution. We see her in the beginning asking Jesus this question: what if we set God free?
Yes.
What
I
if,
love that part.
yeah, what if, you know, we have these narrow conceptions of who God is? What if we just sort of set that free? And I think the book follows that kind of underplay throughout, as Anna, toward the very end of the book, there's a line in which Sepsis, this head of this community in Egypt, says, you teach us about your God, and we'll teach you about ours, and together we'll find the God behind God. There is a kind of God behind God, because we've created these narrow conceptions of who God is. So it's all a grand evolving experiment, but I think that's where we're acorns meant to be oak trees, and we're trying to get there. That's the intention. And there is largeness in us, so much largeness when we set ourselves free. And that's what I wanted to say about Anna. You know, she longed for a voice. She longed to make a difference in the world. She wanted to tell women's stories, these lost stories of women. It sounds a lot like somebody I know who longed to do that too. But she was so dogged and ambitious and sometimes selfish, and she was just fierce and daring. And I loved her every day I wrote her for this book. And I wanted her to be large enough to partner with Jesus and for him to learn from her, which in my version he did.
Yes.
But, you know, that's part of the journey, is setting ourselves free, setting God free.
I love the quote. I actually wrote it down as something I wanted to talk with you. Why should we contain God any longer in our poor and narrow conceptions, which are so often no more than grandiose reflections of ourselves? Let us set him free. Oh, it's so good. I'm like fist pumping in the air when she said that to Jesus. I like to say that Walt Whitman ruined my life, because when I was reading The Leaves of Grass, I came upon his quote in the preface where he says, re-examine all that you've been told in school or church or in any book, and dismiss whatever insults your own soul. And many men and women in my community are in this very process that Anna is in, that's wanting the largeness of God, that is they're being brave enough to dismiss what is insulting their souls. They're, you know, exiting the gift shop in order to view the Grand Canyon for the first time, you know, concerns God. And what I have found in my own life is that as everything superfluous has fallen away, what remains is this tried and true, unassailable mustard seed of faith. And that's really all that that's all that it is. And so I wanted to ask you, do you have any encouragement for us, for those of us who are in this moment of longing to set God free? Do you have because it can feel lonely and it can feel very scary. Do you have a piece of encouragement for us?
Well, I feel very hopeful about the whole thing. I know that having God as male has legitimized male power. We know all these things now. So, as women, as men who are enlightened along, all of us who are trying to become conscious every day, I think our journey now is to come together, voice our truths, be in solidarity, and be hopeful about this. You know, I like that quote by Walt Whitman too. He said, "Dismiss all that insults our soul," but I want to put a okay, here I go trying to paraphrase Walt Whitman, but I would put a footnote on that. Maybe that's better to say. Also, be outraged by everything that insults your soul. One reason I wrote this book is because the anger made me brave, and the grief made me sure. This is why Anna is nickname in the book is Little Thunder, because it's the coming together of heat and light that creates thunder. And we need that. I would say, find your heat, find your light. Your light is your consciousness, it's your freedom, it's your largeness, it's your voice. That when that comes together with that heat or outrage, that's when thunder happens. That's when paradigms change. And I feel like, you know, Christianity is in a spiritual crisis. It's actually dwindling in terms of people and membership and impact. And if you look at statistics around the world, you can see that this is happening, particularly in Europe. And so what does that mean? It means we have to find new pictures of the divine and of ourselves and community around these stories that make us better people, better humans, more loving, because in the end, we're all just little godlings, you know, trying to evolve into what divinity looks like. Right. And I think that ultimately is exactly what Jesus said, love. And so maybe find your heat and light, your largeness, and have the bravery to put it out there. And you'll make a little thunder in the world. And it's a good thing, right?
Such a good thing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and for your words and for the permission that you give us to expand our view of God, to expand our view of these biblical characters, and ultimately to, I think you say in the book, resist and persist. The author said that this is where your power is. You resist and you persist. And that is the thunder, and that is the lightning, and that is what will create waves of change in our world, and so that we can experience the fullness of God, the largeness of God, not only in God's being, but in one another as well.
Well, thank you for letting me have this conversation with you. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, I'm so honored. So very, very honored. Thank you so much.